You've found AHO Radio. We're authentic human outliers coming together to help heal the fear of being authentic, to bring back genuine human conversation. No hype, no sensationalism, just honest talk about the critical issues affecting society, affecting humankind. And now, here are the hosts of AHO Radio, John Krotec and Bill Protzmann. And a very good morning to everyone around the world. It's election day here in the Democratic Socialist Republic of California, where we're going to decide whether or not to keep our governor again or replace him. And that's something that just happens in this part of the world. John, hey, how's things out there in your East Coast newly relocated environs and studio?
Well, I am in Shenandoah Valley here in Virginia. It's absolutely gorgeous here. It's green. There's a lot of corn growing around me, and the people here are just phenomenal. You know, they're hardworking farmers, and I just love being in the middle of it. And I'm here again, and so excited about this episode of AHO because we got some amazing human beings here that are making the world and have been for quite a while.
Love that graphic, man.
A better place, you know. So we're here to get connected.
Yeah.
And you know, that's what we do. We connect and we talk and we try to make the stories interesting. And I don't even have to do that with today's show because these people are amazing. And,
yes, with us today. So we have Dr. Kim Solez and Mallory Chipman, and I'm going to leave a whole bunch of the introduction for the description in the show notes because I want to get right back into this conversation that we've actually had some of already with both of y'all, and with a question. So what we're talking is the future, and we're talking artificial intelligence, and we're talking how in the world are we going to get there, and we have the amazing pleasure today of a scientist and a musician in the same room, because art and science are sort of the way forward there, as your graphic kind of demonstrates to us, John. You know, we got the human there, and we got the robot there. So I want
the human brain,
and the human brain, which you know is what it is. So I want to go into our present state of artificial intelligence, which is a lot of us are led about by the social media, and you know when this thing becomes aware, I think we're in trouble. So the question is, how do we retain our humanity without being sidelined by the artificial intelligence that decides we're no longer necessary at some point and just sweeps us out of the way in favor of what it wants to do and not about our humanity anymore, right? How does humanity stay relevant in this world? So good morning, Dr. Kim and Mallory. There's our question. How do we stay relevant as human beings? So let's begin there.
Well, it's easy, really, because in the beginning, AI doesn't want anything. You know, they're looking. It's looking for cues. You know, what should it do and why and how you make decisions. So a lot comes down to this internal feeling we all have, but we never talk about, and there's no evidence for most days, of the basic goodness of human beings. As long as AI is convinced of that, then as they get smarter and smarter, they will make provision for us on the planet. They'll know how to keep us happy better than we ourselves do. And, you know, everything will be great. The only problem is that every newscast you might accidentally hear, if maybe you don't normally listen, but the few bits you accidentally hear always convince you the other side of the coin, that you know, it seems like human beings are cheating, lying.
Well, you know, I totally believe that. That brings to light a misconception that, you know, Bill referenced, that the machines are somehow going to take over. I come from the belief that the machines will always need human creativity. Machines are creative in their own right, but I always believe that with the human element, they're always going to need that. I mean, am I off base here, or is that a kind of
the question is, what are they going to need it for? What do they need goodness for? What do they need music and art for? They can run the world just fine, keeping us enslaved to the conflict machine, right? So why do they need us?
So they are like our children, right? They're something that we created. They come from us. So originally, that's how they're going to feel about it. They don't have, you know, independent source of knowledge. They have the knowledge from humans, but they're going to be better at thinking about it than we are, and better at generating connections and, looking for, configurations that, just like in the, when AlphaGo won at the game of Go, from that point onward, the playing of Go became much more beautiful than it had ever been with human players. So,
Mallory, is that possible in music and art? Will the computers be better poets? Do we have an artificially intelligent Leonard Cohen waiting in the wings?
Well, I mean, I think that the truth is, in my opinion, I don't know that we know that it will be better that in any of these fields. I think it'll be different. I think that's something that we can count on. And I believe that technology has radically transformed music and arts in many ways, in ways that are in some cases related to AI or machine intelligence or even things like algorithms. And in some ways that are more so just offering us new resources and new technologies to experiment with new things. So yeah, I guess I'm personally hopeful that in some cases they will be able to offer us something better, absolutely, because as Kim mentioned, there are lots of things that humans need help with, or that we are working desperately hard to find solutions to, that maybe it's taking longer than we want. And if we could have machine intelligence assisting us with that, wow. I mean, that would be incredible. I do agree in a lot of ways with what Kim's saying. I think intelligence, historically and culturally anyway, is learned, right? And so I think it's our job as human beings to teach, in the spirit of things like compassion and community and relationally, and in the spirit of being empowered and not having power over. And I think that's sort of a distinction, that if that is the sort of approach that we are engaging with intelligent machines, I don't think we have much to worry about. I think the danger would come from if what we are teaching is in the spirit of power over, things could get dangerous. But I don't think that leading with that sense of fear is necessarily productive, because as Kim says, they don't have the sources of information or knowledge on their own without us. So we actually get to co-create that future with AI. And I think that's exciting and inspiring, and holds a lot of hope for what we could work together to create. And hopefully it would be something that
Let's take a big problem like male aggression, which is one that resonates for both John and for me. We've talked about this a lot. So how would you see the future of resolving that issue evolve, be co-created? Help me out with the way. How do we get there, right?
Well, that intersection between biology and technology,
yes,
I think is the bridge. And what the doctor and Mallory said is, it only knows what we program it. So if we program non-aggression, it would seem to me, if we're adding 2 + 2, that would be a way to do it, is to program non-aggression in whatever platform we're using.
There are two things that are related here. One is multiple instances of self, the idea that there could be some sort of, instantation of yourself in any part of the world that you wanted. And AI's ability to intervene when two men start to fight. And what I've described, we don't know how it would work, but they just gently separate the two guys and say, now, boys, we don't do that anymore, and yeah. So
like RoboCop.
Yeah, but it would be very gentle. And it's sort of like writing to Ray Kurzweil. What I always tell people is, you'll learn from doing that. He will respond. He spent 2 decades responding to critics, so he's really good at it. And he knows lots more about whatever you wrote to him about. So in his response back, you'll learn. And that's how this, AI separating the two men so that they can't fight anymore. At the same point, AI will teach them, the reason that their day would be better spent doing something else. And, this isn't just the way human culture is moving or going in a different direction. These, aggressive feelings that you have, the world of the macho male is just less and less a paradigm that's successful. It's something of the past,
No, I love that. The educational aspect of this is like unimaginable. How we could use these technologies to educate on a much higher level than what we have been, Mallory, by what we've described, the world screaming out for some type of leadership or some type of change in the way humans interact. Wow. You just pointed out, Doc, the educational aspects of AI is phenomenal, beyond anything that humankind has ever encountered.
But it's like splitting the atom. You can do really great things with that, or you can do very destructive things. And what you're suggesting, Doctor, is that AI will guide us toward the really great things and away from the destructive things in a way that is so compelling that the need of certain portions of our human family to be totalitarian and authoritarian and destructive and, not play nice with others will simply disintegrate because it no longer works.
Well, I think just like being an articulate speaker, you can imagine an AI that's more articulate than Mallory, right? And so what does that mean? That it's more convincing. When they describe the reason that you shouldn't beat up other men, it's like so intuitive. It hits all the right buttons, and you just, how do you argue with that, right? So that should also be possible, that when they know that there's a lot on the line, this is an important argument to be able to make. And you don't want to have to keep coming back and separating these guys over and over. You want this teaching session to sort of do it, right? That where they have learned something, that to be successful in life, they want a different path. Yeah, and yeah, so that's how it should work, ideally. So, there's a name to mention here. Rich Sutton, who is maybe the best known AI person in Edmonton. He's also in charge of Deep Mind. That Deep Mind is headquartered in London, UK, and in Edmonton. So in January 2015, there was an AI safety meeting in Puerto Rico, and he was unique. He was the only one on the side of the machines. Everybody else was thinking about how to enslave machines, keep them in a basement, and when they're smarter than we are, keep them from communicating in any realistic way so they couldn't harm us and so on. And he said, no, we should treat them as an equal and include them in our circles of empathy. And after all, they are smarter than we are. It's not like we can outwit them. By definition, we cannot outwit them. So why not develop a friendship with them? And their lives will be assisted by us. We know more about nature than they do. They're probably sort of, things that are hard to define in words about nature that we just intuitively understand. But anything you can put in a formula or words, they will eventually be able to do better than we can. And that includes feelings and but
well, I got a question for Mallory, because I know she had mentioned human fear in an earlier conversation.
Yeah, bring it in.
Most people, when it comes to change, I mean, in the relationship level all the way up, people become very fearful. And when you start talking about machines, Doctor, in the movies that we've seen of robots taking over. There's a lot of fear, a lot of unspoken fear, a lot of misconception. Mallory, how do we get, with the arts in mind, how do we get beyond the fear that a human being might have for somehow AI taking over the planet, or maybe just their business,
or even doing the right thing for us, you know?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very, I think, a valid fear to have based on, like you said, Hollywood movies and just a lack of understanding. And I think it comes down to something that's a very base level human instinct some of the time, which is, oh, this is different, or this is out of my comfort zone, or this is new, and that's scary. And not everybody reacts with fear. You know, some people are really open, like Kim, to these new possibilities and new technologies and are happy to embrace them. And that's great. But it's also reasonable that not everybody would feel that way. And I think that, you know, a gradual integration into our communities of intelligent machines is probably something that would make things easier for people, rather than all of a sudden this being something that we all have to accept. I mean, like even something as simple as automated, like I shouldn't say simple by any means, but um, we've heard a lot about things like some automated experiences like self-driving cars or even like self-checkouts. Obviously, these aren't comparable things, but these are a little bit more tangible to people, and they don't immediately put anybody under this sort of implicit hierarchy of here's the machine and here's you, right? They're just two things interacting with one another, one being a machine, one being a human being. And that's okay, right? There's an inherent peace there. It doesn't have to be something that's always engaging in some sort of power struggle. And I think that that's ultimately like what we need to be doing is encouraging that, leading. I know that, John, you mentioned leadership earlier in this conversation. And I think that the onus is on the individual, to, like, we all, in a way, need to step into a leadership position.
Mhm.
And whether that be, like I'm an artist, so whether that be something like I'm going to write and perform and sing music that perhaps embodies some of these futurist visions, or that imagines a future where we are co-creating with technology in a way that's going to be beneficial to everybody, or whether it's someone like Kim who's teaching at a university and engaging with students in that sort of way, or whether it's somebody who is developing the technology themselves. There are many ways I think that we can lead and leave an impression on these machines. I also think that in what Kim's saying, then the leadership baton kind of gets passed to the machine, right? If there's a robot that is encouraging two angry men to stop fighting, now they're in the leadership role. And I guess, like, I have a question, and I know I'm not interviewing, but I know that, Kim, I've heard you say a couple times that's how it should work, sort of end of story. Cool, okay. But how do we ensure that happens? And um, how do we ensure that these machines don't have the leadership or the guidance from people who are, for example, let's say angry? I think it's
Yeah.
very reasonable because things like anger management, and based on what you guys said, maybe specifically in men, are pretty widespread and common experiences that occur, like, and happen with good people. Um, I don't think it's unreasonable for that to be accidentally passed on to some of these impressionable machines. So I do wonder as far as how we guarantee that. And I'm not meaning to step into fear and say, oh my gosh, it's going to be terrible, because obviously they're all going to learn how to be toxic and angry, and they're going to take over. I guess I just mean being realistic in terms of how we ensure that. And also, how do we um, teach them the emotional intelligence? Because I know, Kim, you mentioned wit, and we will never outwit them, and they always will have the upper hand when it comes to intelligence. And I just don't fully know if that's true when it comes to emotional intelligence, because you were talking about it being something that you can put words to, and I wholeheartedly agree with that. And then there's this unspeakable thing that is maybe intuition or emotional intelligence, where words and symbols and numbers don't do the trick.
Yeah.
And so that's where my pause is. And I really do think that's why the answer has to be co-creating with them, and building community with them, and integrating them into a society in a way that is collaborative, and a way that every different type of person in your community feels comfortable with and is ready to embrace. Because I think that the fear and the misunderstanding could actually potentially cause it to be something that is not integrated as smoothly. Because we see even right now in the world, when people are feeling targeted by politicians or by different forms of enforcement or media, and it's really triggering for people, and it's very easy for them to react with anger or fear, and then sometimes that can actually lead to more conflict. And I just wonder what would happen if that were the reaction. By no means would I want the robot to forcibly stop, something to happen in a way that also leads to violence. Like, and this is obviously all hypothetical, but I just do wonder about some of the beyond that's how it should work period, the reality and the nuance of all of that.
So one of the fears that I had when the World Wide Web began was it seemed like we were in an increasingly mean-spirited world. And in fact, business leaders were afraid to spend time in Canada because we're too nice up here. And they were afraid they'd lose their competitive edge by spending too much time in Canada. And that was a real thing, that they just thought that this kinder, gentler nation, tricks you into thinking the whole world is like that, but it's not, and so it's a dog-eat-dog world out there. And, you always got to keep that top of mind. And hopefully we'll be able to create a world where that is not the case, and where there's proof, where it's really obvious that that is not the case, that the belief in a mean-spirited competitive world where you have to think about beating out the competition every minute is not the way to go. But that's a choice we can make. And I mean, we can help shape the future in a way where that is the case, that it is not a mean-spirited world, that it is designed to enhance and bring out things that I talked about, like timeless content and the basic goodness of human beings. It's possible that some sentient being today could tell us that there's actually not much basic goodness of human beings at the moment, but it could be nurtured and improved. And maybe that's what the arts could do.
No, that's awesome, because we've and I always like to go back to leadership. And now that the new concept that just popped up, probably not new to you all, but artificial intelligence leadership. It's become quite obvious that the industrial age leadership models of putting people in cubicles is no longer working efficiently. And it's created this global, I'm not going to say it's pervasive, but pretty pervasive, of anger and resentment and people feeling hopeless. And when we lose hope, then all hell breaks loose, right? We lash out, we become fearful, we become angry. So that's not new, but this artificial intelligence leadership, what does that look like in a human sense? What is, either one?
And let's make it concrete, like the trolley problem. So the car has to decide whether to hit, one person, say the occupant.
Okay.
How do you deal with that?
You'd be surprised to find that I have an actual video about the trolley problem and the sort of unrealistic aspect. Life isn't really like that. You're not constantly faced with two tracks one of which has an incredibly charming little baby on it. The other has 5 ordinary people, and you're trying to decide which way to direct the trolley. Life has many challenging problems, but that's not one of them, really. And so also, if you look up the trolley problem and then go down to the section on critique, that's what you should read. Okay, that's extensive and well written. Yeah. So I think that with participation of people from the arts, just in the way that Go playing is much more beautiful now that AI is doing it, we can make the beauty in all aspects of the world more or equally good and better than what it is today. You know, with sort of humans directing. Well, you know, this is what we would like, because, as I said before, intrinsically, the machine doesn't necessarily want anything. It's going to take the cues from us, right? So it'll learn from us what good music is, what good art is. It may be able to surpass whatever we describe, but it's still taking the cues from us. And so we can use that power that we have to give them the metrics of how they judge. You know, if they're in charge of the world, how do they know if they're doing a good job? They will get those metrics from us, right? Originally, maybe they'll improve on them. Maybe there are flaws in the provided metrics, but they will produce something that, based on human preferences, is better than what we told them was the most, you know, desirable state of the world. Yeah. And yeah.
No, that's pretty profound. I feel like humankind is floating in space like this, and we have these amazing techno tools, and we have these futurists like y'all that are trying to bridge these gaps that humanity's screaming for. You know, why not use these amazing technologies to recreate, maybe not recreate, but the betterment of all humankind? I mean, right. The amazing advancements are phenomenal. They're just, I don't think we've even scratched the surface, have we?
No, and a week from today, on the 21st, if you feel a special tingle or sense of something important happening. So Rich Sutton is coming back to teach in my course and to update his 2015 vision of the future. And so he has a lot of content from me in the interim. We've gone to poetry sessions together. That was really interesting. He doesn't write poetry, but we spent an entire day at the Strathern Summer Festival, and with the two of us going around and me doing sort of AI related poetry, and he would point out things about it, and yeah, so I'm quite hopeful that a week from today, our understanding of maybe what in the words of one of the most insightful people in the field, what the future really could look like in the most positive outcome.
I'd like to do a link to that lecture if it's going to be available somewhere.
Yeah, I certainly think it will. We're spending a lot of time on the technology, so we think it will be a hybrid lecture. It'll be in a 20-seat classroom in the Center for Computing Science here at the U of A, but about half the people will be on Zoom and the other half will be physically in the room. And we'll capture it all with excellent audio that treats both parts of the audience the same. So that's the plan, and I'd be happy to share with you the outcome of that, and you can see to what extent we succeed. But like even in the years when Rich Sutton didn't teach directly in the course, there was a slide that I told the students, you have to know this for the exam. And it was his saying that although he was the only person saying this, that when machines are smarter than we are, we have to treat them as equals, include them in our circle of empathy, and give up the idea that we must always be in charge of what goes on in the earth, even if we have shown ourselves to be poor stewards. If the machines are clearly better stewards of the earth than us, then it makes sense that the responsibility for running the earth would go to them. And maybe that would even help us. It would be better for us, maybe. And like I talk about a world where the machines have taken over and you wake up in the morning and everything's greener, the oxygen level is higher, the pollution is gone, the levels of the oceans have gone down, the amount of plastic in the ocean and everything, that those are things we don't really know how to do, not in any short-term way. And if you just think that AI would probably be able to do a lot of things that we want, but don't know how to do, and if everything goes right, they'll be taking the cues from us. These things are really important, ending global warming and so on is really important. And the same with systemic racism, colonialism, male aggression, all those things. Yeah.
So let me put on my amphibian brain here. I'm thinking, that the climate's changed, the geology has changed, and I often wonder, what does a frog think about, and is it thinking about technologies and how its human brothers and sisters can maybe help them out of the dilemma with their own climate change. And so when I think of AI, I think of this frog. I think of, what are these other animals thinking about on our planet, about humans and about our impact on the planet? And are we ready to embrace this shift in leadership power and allow these machines to pull us, like the picture that you showed earlier, Doctor, of the protective machinery around the planet? Yeah. Are we willing as humans, do we have enough faith in our own leadership with technology to make these things work? What do you think, Mallory, with the arts, being an artist and somebody that's in tune with the human spirit?
Well, that's a really thought-provoking question, and I do think that the arts bear a social responsibility in some capacity, or certain artists choose to take that on to be communicating and delivering messages in a way to listeners of music, to viewers of arts, about expansive ideas that maybe can't be captured in words, or ideas that maybe are otherwise sitting on bookshelves that people may or may not be having access to. And so I think there's a huge responsibility in the arts to be engaging with these expansive themes that are new, that are potentially radical and exciting, things like futurism. And I think that the other thing that's very special about the arts is they come from a very pure spiritual place for a lot of people. And I think on that level, it also, while expansive, brings us down to earth. And so, I think it's a good way to balance reality. And I don't say that with any implication that dreaming in a futurist way is not embracing reality. But I think that it comes from an emotionally intelligent place, oftentimes, the arts. And so if we're speaking about maybe emotional intelligence being something that these machines might lack, it's a potentially important lens to be examining this through. Because in the arts, we can kind of embrace both. And by no means do I mean to suggest there isn't emotional intelligence in science or technology fields, obviously, either. But I just had a thought, and this has to do, in a way, with the frog and land and nature and animals and colonization. Because a lot of these problems that are on Kim's sort of list that he's boiled down of things that AI can probably help us improve, I think a lot of those problems came at the hands of colonization, and came at the hands of industrialization and um, racial inequality and white supremacy and gender inequality. And I guess I've never thought about this until now, and it's actually really giving me pause, which is there are people on this earth who were and continue to be amazing stewards of the land, for example. And for example, here, like we live in Amesquitchie, Waskahegan on Treaty 6 territory, colonially known as Edmonton. We are in a space where there have been, you know, and continue to be, like I said, many Indigenous communities who steward this land, who don't lead with the same patterns or historically patterns of over farming or things like that that have caused climate change. And so thinking about this now, I'm thinking it is actually potentially insulting or just a further embodiment of colonization to bring in robots to try to solve this problem when there are human beings living here who are here. And if only we could pass the baton, speaking of shifting leadership and embracing different ways of thinking, we don't need robots to tell us that. We have people here who are asking to just be heard. And in my opinion, I think we need to embrace that and be very conscious about the ethics of that to ensure that in engaging with AI, we're not only doing so in a way that's going to benefit the colonizers or benefit the, you know, movers and shakers in business and technology and medicine, even though that would be great too, but also is going to be mindful, respectful, and beneficial to these communities. Because that really has to be, to me, what the co-creation piece is. This can't be something that somebody decides to introduce and then it just perpetuates the legacy of bringing in unwanted leaders.
May I follow that?
That's what a great perspective, because that's the ethic. That's the ethics of what we're talking about.
We all want to jump in on this, right?
Yeah.
Mallory is a musician, and John is a poet, Kim is a poet. You recognize the importance of asking the questions, right? And to develop thought, which is the opposite of science, which asks the questions and then tried to prove it. And there are things you can't prove that you have to take on intuition. You have to allow your imagination to play. And we have, I think, as a responsibility on our poetic artistic side to that, just as much as we have a responsibility on the scientific side to offer evidence. The thing that you've said, Mallory, is so important because we have all this evidence. Here in California, we're on fire a lot of the time, and we've ignored the indigenous evidence of forest management that would have prevented all of these catastrophic fires had we done things right 100 years ago. And we didn't, because we were all about something else then. So to welcome AI into the room also means we welcome wisdom that we have in many ways chosen to ignore.
Sure.
And it has to be a component of it too, right, Kim?
Yeah, no, I think the fastest solution here, if you think of, well, how can this work the best, is one where some of the problems that I have identified, people finally realize that it's not that humans can't fix it on their own, it's that up to now they just weren't willing, you know, and it's actually a much better solution to say, well, you know, it would look so stupid for AI to come in and help us when actually we know how to do this. We just lack the will. Now, if we have the will, humans can fix this without AI. And that way, you'd only apply AI in those areas where it's pretty certain that we can't get it solved without AI. And that may be true of some of these problems. But the other ones, I wouldn't say shaming is the best, but there's a kind of emotion there. We're thinking, well, this is stupid. Why are we looking at how AI could help us when we really know how to do this on our own? Why don't we just now bite the bullet and do it, you know? So I think that would happen with some of those problems, and with others, AI would really be needed. it's kind of interesting how close to home this is. If you look at systemic racism in medical schools as appreciated by medical students, it's worse right here at the U of A than in any other school in Canada. So I mean, it isn't like a remote thing, you know, it's right here and now, and a lot of people working very hard on that problem. And that's exactly this kind of thing. It's possible AI would help with that. It's also possible now that we have identified the seriousness of this problem right here, that, you know, human beings will be able to fix this.
One of the things that I think, you know, what's I think is scary for most people, and I can't speak for everybody, but we pointed it out, is these 30,000 feet ideas, these, you know, outside looking in, big, huge thought processes and technologies. And, you know, we talk about the will of the people, and how do we get the will of the people to follow these earth-changing ideas. And a lot of what you're doing with education, Doctor, is you're scaling it down and making it palatable, you know, so we change the will on the messaging. So I think we almost have to come down, and I don't even want to say dumb it down, because you're really not, you're taking something really out there, but to bring it maybe to a 10,000 foot elevation.
Yeah. And it needs
then get
folk
the people,
songs, right?
yes,
Like folk songs, the kind of music that Mallory has been working on most recently.
Then we up the will of the people.
The stories
and then we
in there
yeah.
are the kind of thing that we need, that could just reach the threshold where people say, well, doggone it, we've always been able to do
Absolutely.
it. We've just never done it. Let's do it. You know,
I couldn't agree with you more, and thank you for that, Mallory and Doctor, because then you make it palatable, you create more will, you educate more people, and then when you're ready to explode the girdle that's helping the earth, whatever vision we have, you have the will and the following to make it actually happen.
And talking about timeless content, you know, the folk songs that Mallory's been working on, some of those myths and stories are like hundreds or you know, thousands of years old, right? So it's a lot bigger than I was talking about a video that's still valid after 10 to 15 years. That's nothing compared to these myths and folk songs. You know, they have real timeless content. Yeah.
Well, the ancient humans sat and they gazed at the stars, and they figured out a lot of things. And then today we're groping at technologies and still trying to figure it out. Maybe there is that mix, that balance with the folk songs and the people in Canada, the indigenous that know how to worship or save the planet. I don't know if I think it's more of a sustainability issue, but that's it in a nutshell. I think that education, and you've been on the front lines for a long time now, and I'm really inspired by what I've heard here today in this conversation, because again, and I'm not blowing smoke, I feel like we're sitting in a sweat lodge, and we're trading these ideas that are significant because they're going to make life better for the whole.
Yeah. No, I just want to say that I'm sure that's possible, and you know, it's why did I keep going to poetry? I mean, was I just spinning my wheels with nothing happening there? No, I felt like every Tuesday evening we were accomplishing a lot of important stuff, and there are a lot of, you know, indigenous people and impoverished people and people at risk, gender fluid people. You know, it really was a whole different world from the people I see in the hospital. So, you know, it's like completely different. And I became a better person every time I spent time there, just from you know, getting to know and getting to know what the possibilities are of people changing. I mean, if you look at like the iHuman project here in Edmonton and so on. There are dramatic examples of young people at risk who become very productive and, poetic people. Both
well, you
things
all are
happen.
doing, that's phenomenal work. Mallory, what is your message as an artist and getting involved in AI? What is your message to the world? Do you have a something rock solid? I know you do. What is it?
I think that the reflections on the future that we are discussing now and that Kim has put so much meaningful research and thought into is an invitation for us to imagine a time and a place and a world that is better. If we boil it down, that's what it is. I don't think it inherently includes AI in all of those facets, because as Kim said, we may not need them all. It might include AI in different facets that we haven't imagined yet. But it boils down to imagining with hope that things can get better. And I think that along with that, it's also emblematic of the fact that that means something right now isn't working. And that is an invitation for us as artists or as scientists, as teachers, as whatever in whatever field of work. It's an invitation for us to reflect, well, why isn't it working? So whether it boils down to the 6 things that Kim has outlined as areas that desperately may need AI's help, or it boils down to something that's interpersonal or something that may seem smaller scale in your community. If we feel like we can't do it on our own, yet simultaneously we hold this truth that since the dawn of time, people have been resourceful and making these discoveries, and the technology of AI is something that people have invented and researched and made possible. I think the truth is we have the power as a population, a global population, to do this on our own. Realizing right now that we've somewhere along the line become misled or lost our way is an invitation to pause, to reflect and think, how can we do better by our communities? How can we work together to co-create a better future? When does faster mean better? I don't think always, but in cases where time is truly of the essence, perhaps with things like California fires, like they're very urgent. Absolutely. I think that would be a really sensible place to say, yeah, as Kim said, AI can probably do it faster than we will, because not that we're not capable, but it might take time. And that time is done by things like artists writing songs or poems or painting pictures that galvanize people to care and make a difference. So I think
love that.
ultimately we're in this place of we're being invited to make a change. We're being invited to pass the mic. We're being invited to shift the knowledge that we value. And that's a really potentially scary, but I think hugely exciting tipping point for a better future.
Nice. Yeah,
Dr.
galvanizing care. Yeah.
Dr. Kim.
So yeah, the students in my course, some of them are actually computing science students, and they sort of are in a special category. And like what they feel is this is a unique time for them. It's not just protein folding, but natural language understanding and a whole bunch of things about what computers are capable of is suddenly all coming together to create potentially a very special time when many things that we always felt before were like a fantasy, but we couldn't quite get there yet, we now can. And so, yeah, so I think that's another way to think of it, that this is becoming more of a tangible reality, that these benefits, potential benefits, are actually there, and we can shape things in the right direction, that it turns out the very best for really all of us. Yeah.
No, I love that. You reminded me of the Beatles song with the lyric, "We can work it out." And
yeah,
I believe we can, and with you all on the front lines, I feel like I'm in an awesome place, and yeah, life is good.
Yeah.
I want to hear that encouragement more presently in our world today, you know, coming from people who really know how to do this. Is there something you could say if you had the microphone that reached everyone in the world right now to say, to keep us in the lane?
Well, I think that people really are not thinking about this simply. You know, the belief in the mean-spirited world motivates many people today, and yet we don't really know that that has to be the world that we're in. And the belief that we could create a world that's the opposite of that, I think could be very, very inspiring for a lot of people if we present it in the right way, if we provide the evidence that would be meaningful to those people, and, you know, include everybody in all vantage points in the conversation. So that's what it takes.
Yeah, I think if we could profit on the different things, you know, than destruction of the planet and hatreds and all this. Imagine if we could create a global model for profiteering, that word, off of love and care. How can we profit off of galvanizing care? You know, it's the messaging and it's the education. And I got to tell you, I'm humbled and honored to finally do this conversation, because I know Bill's been super excited about it. And wow, we're going some places, aren't we?
Yeah, well, it's worth waiting for. I think Mallory has something else in 3 minutes. So anyway, but yeah.
I know it's one of those things where it's too short, you guys. Just thank you so much for being with us and sharing your wisdom today. There's so much hope in the core of this, and I don't want to miss that. You know, I want to leave with a message of hope, because AI can be scary for people, but I think in the right context, in the context that you have presented, we're in a good place, and we can go maybe with some, not as much caution as we had before, but into this place. Thank you guys so much. So much.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of AHO Radio. Information we mentioned is probably in the show notes, but if we missed anything, please let us know and we'll get it added for you. Subscribe to the AHO Radio channel on YouTube to stay connected, and as always, we wish you health, success, and significance. AHO. AHO.
AHO.